On January 1st, 2023, the water stopped. Not for a city of 5 million. Not yet. It stopped for a few thousand people living in homes worth over $1 million on the edge of the fifth largest city in America, a community called the Rio Verde Foothills. One day, the tanker trucks that filled their cisterns were there. The next, they were gone. Cut off by the neighboring city of Scottsdale, which needed to hoard its own dwindling supply. It wasn't a shortage. It wasn't a restriction. It was a termination. The taps went dry. For 3 years, American citizens in a wealthy corner of Arizona lived on paper plates to avoid washing dishes. They skipped showers. They watched their horses sicken from dehydration. Resident Cody Ream, who became the public face of the crisis, described it bluntly. "We're not really getting to live in our house." An underground black market for water emerged, with neighbors secretly selling from their private wells at triple the price. It was a desperate, chaotic, system-wide failure. A preview of what happens when the water disappears. The question is, was it an isolated incident, or was it the first domino of a catastrophe that could empty an entire American metropolis? If you want to know how this ends, and how we got here, leave a comment below with your prediction. I read all of them. But here is the part you aren't being told. The story of Rio Verde was just a test run. The real crisis is happening right now, beneath the streets of Phoenix itself, and the people in charge just made a decision that could seal the city's fate. We put months of work into documentaries like this one, but a huge number of our viewers aren't subscribed. If you value this kind of reporting, take 1 second to hit that subscribe button. It is a critical signal that this work matters, and it ensures you won't miss the next investigation. Let's begin. Phoenix was never supposed to exist. It is a city built on a mirage. The fifth largest in the United States, a sprawling monument to air conditioning and defiance, sitting in the middle of the Sonoran Desert, a place that receives less than 8 inches of rain in a good year, where summer temperatures don't just visit 115 degrees, they settle in for the season. By any law of nature, this metropolis of 5.2 million people is an impossibility. Its survival has always depended on 2 colossal acts of 20th century geoengineering. 2 pillars holding up the entire enterprise. The first is the Colorado River, siphoned off and pumped 336 miles across the desert through a massive canal system called the Central Arizona Project, a river that provides water to 40 million people across 7 states. The second pillar is the water hidden underneath the city itself, an ancient, finite aquifer of groundwater pumped from wells drilled deep into the earth. For decades, these 2 pillars seemed strong enough to support a fantasy of limitless growth. In 1980, state lawmakers passed the Arizona Groundwater Management Act, a landmark piece of legislation with one core promise: new housing developments could only be built if they could prove an assured water supply for 100 years. It was a guarantee, a contract with the future. For decades, developers used Colorado River water to secure that guarantee, and the city boomed. The population doubled, and then it doubled again. Phoenix became one of the fastest growing cities in American history, a magnet for jobs, for families, for anyone seeking a life in the sun, and the water flowed. But the pillars that held up this desert kingdom were starting to crack. The first to buckle was the Colorado River. 2 decades of relentless, climate change-fueled megadrought have crippled the entire system. The river is shrinking. Its 2 great reservoirs, Lake Powell and Lake Mead, have hit historic lows. That iconic white bathtub ring on the canyon walls of Lake Mead isn't just a scar. It's a measuring stick for a slow-motion catastrophe, marking every foot of water the city has lost. By 2024, the federal government had no choice. It declared a Tier 1 shortage for the river, a formal recognition that the system was breaking. That declaration triggered automatic, legally binding cuts. Arizona had its supply from the Colorado River slashed by 512,000 acre-feet. That is not a small number. It is a catastrophic loss. An acre-foot is the amount of water needed to cover 1 acre of land with 1 foot of water. To put 512,000 acre-feet in terms you can picture, that's enough water to supply nearly 2 million average American homes for an entire year. And it's gone. Vanished from Arizona's annual supply, by federal mandate in 2024, 2025, and now 2026. Every year. That is a cut of nearly 18% of the state's entire river allotment. The first pillar holding up Phoenix was crumbling in real time. With the Colorado River unreliable, developers and city planners turned to the second pillar, the one beneath their feet, the groundwater. The logic seemed simple. If the river runs low, just drill more wells. Pump more of that ancient water from the earth to satisfy the 100-year supply rule. Keep building, keep growing, keep the economic engine running. There was just one problem. The math was a lie. The groundwater was not limitless. It never was. On June 1st, 2023, the truth detonated like a bomb inside the state capitol. The Arizona Department of Water Resources, or ADGR, released a new hydrogeological model. It was the result of years of painstaking measurement and analysis. And its conclusion was terrifying. The groundwater basin beneath Phoenix was catastrophically overallocated. The model projected a 100-year shortfall of 4.86 million acre-feet. Let that number sink in. Not a surplus. Not a balance. A deficit of nearly 5 million acre-feet of groundwater that the state had promised to developers, but which physically did not exist. The 100-year assured water supply that had fueled decades of explosive growth was a phantom. An accounting trick. The state's own scientists had just proven that the second pillar holding up Phoenix was hollow. Arizona's new governor, Katie Hobbs, acted immediately. Faced with the state's own apocalyptic data, she did the only logical thing. She issued a moratorium, halting all new housing subdivisions on the outskirts of Phoenix that planned to rely solely on that disappearing groundwater. She was attempting to stop builders from selling homes they knew would one day run dry. It was a desperate, necessary move to prevent a future catastrophe. One state agency had finally slammed the brakes on a runaway train. For a moment, it seemed like sanity might prevail, like the state was finally confronting the impossible physics of its own existence. The governor, armed with indisputable science, had drawn a line in the sand. But in Arizona, the desert is not the only unforgiving force. So is the real estate lobby. The moment the moratorium was announced, the war began. Homebuilders, land developers, and powerful business interests saw the governor's order not as a survival strategy, but as an existential threat to their business model. A model built on the promise of ceaseless expansion. They sued. They argued the state had overstepped its authority, that the ADWR's new model was an illegal interpretation of the 1980 law. The case moved through the courts, a quiet, technical battle that would decide the fate of millions of people. It led to a courtroom in Maricopa County, and to a single judge named Scott Blaney, on April 21st, 2026. Judge Blaney issued a ruling that sent a shockwave through the water management community. He sided with the developers. He ruled that the Arizona Department of Water Resources had acted illegally when it paused the housing permits. He declared that the agency could not factor in the unmet demand across the entire basin when evaluating a single development's 100-year supply. In effect, he ordered the state to ignore its own comprehensive data, to look at each project in a vacuum, as if the 4.86 million acre-foot deficit didn't exist. He had just given developers a legal loophole big enough to drive a bulldozer through. Think about the sheer insanity of that decision. The state's own scientists produce a detailed, peer-reviewed model proving there is a catastrophic water shortage. The governor acts on that science to protect future homeowners. And a single county judge, in a single ruling, strikes it all down, effectively ordering the state to pretend the water is still there, to keep issuing building permits for homes in a region that has mathematically been proven to be running dry. Sarah Porter, a leading water expert at Arizona State University, summed up the bewildering outcome. It does seem to put the Department of Water Resources back to before they updated their groundwater model, she said, and they found that there was a supply-demand gap for the Phoenix AMA. It was a legal decision that willfully ignored physical reality. The floodgates for new construction were open again, not because more water had been found, but because a judge had decided the math no longer mattered. This is a moment so surreal it almost defies belief. Leave a comment and let me know. Should a single judge have the power to overrule the scientific consensus on a region's water supply? It feels like we are watching a system actively choose to self-destruct. The consequences of this are not abstract. While lawyers and judges debated legal theory, the ground beneath Phoenix was already sending its own verdict. The relentless pumping of groundwater, the very practice the 2026 ruling had just turbocharged, is causing the city to physically sink. The process is called subsidence. When you drain an aquifer, you are removing the water that helps support the soil and rock above it. The ground compacts, like a drying sponge, and it doesn't bounce back. The collapse is permanent. Satellite data published recently in the scientific journal Nature Cities shows that the entire Phoenix metro area is sinking. The average rate is about 0.85 millimeters per year. But in some areas, the problem is far worse. The northern suburb of Pinnacle Peak, an area of rapid development, is sinking by a staggering 5 millimeters every year. That's almost 2 inches per decade. It sounds small. It is not. This slow-motion collapse puts immense stress on everything built on the surface. It cracks home foundations. It ruptures water mains and sewer lines. It damages roads, bridges, and the critical canal systems that bring what little river water Arizona still gets into the city. While the politicians fight in court, the very land the city is built on is deflating from below. It is an invisible crisis, a silent structural failure happening under the feet of 5 million people who have no idea their city is slowly caving in on itself. But there is a third failure that makes this story even more disturbing: a political betrayal. In 2022, Arizona's leaders seemed to grasp the scale of the coming crisis. They created a special agency, the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority of Arizona, or WIFA. Its mission was monumental: find new sources of water to save the state. Its primary focus was a moonshot project, building a massive desalination plant on the Sea of Cortez in Mexico and piping the fresh water hundreds of miles north to Phoenix and Tucson. It was a wildly expensive, technologically complex, but potentially game-changing solution. To fund it, lawmakers set aside a $1 billion war chest. $1 billion. Specifically earmarked to invent a future for a state that was running out of options. It should have been a story of foresight and ambition, a state confronting its destiny head-on. That is not what happened. As soon as the fund was created, those same state lawmakers began to raid it, facing budget deficits for everyday government expenses. They saw the billion-dollar water fund not as a sacred trust for survival, but as a convenient piggy bank. In 2025, they clawed back hundreds of millions. In June 2026, as the water crisis deepened, they did it again, snatching another $20 million to patch a hole in the state budget. By mid-2026, nearly two-thirds of the money meant to save Arizona from a water apocalypse had been siphoned off for routine expenses. Warren Tenney, a director at the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association, was aghast. "We're definitely behind," he warned. "We as a state need to show that we are seriously working to come up with new supplies to help offset reductions to the Colorado River." But the state wasn't showing that. It was doing the opposite. It was defunding its own rescue plan. First, they proved the water was gone. Then, a judge forced them to pretend it wasn't. And finally, they raided the very fund that was their last, best hope for finding a real solution. It is a trifecta of failure: scientific, legal, and political, all happening at once. If this story is giving you a sense of just how fragile our systems are, hit that like button so this report can break through the algorithm. And share this with your family. This isn't just a local Arizona news story. This is a blueprint for urban collapse that could happen in any city that takes its resources for granted. While Phoenix spirals, the smaller community of Rio Verde foothills offers an almost perfect, tragic epilogue. For 3 agonizing years, those residents fought. They protested, they pleaded with county officials, they took their case to the state. Finally, a Canadian utility company named EPCOR was granted the right to build a new standpipe and pipeline. On January 1, 2026, exactly 3 years after their water was shut off, the new filling station opened. Water flowed again. A private corporation had stepped in to solve a problem that government had created and then failed to fix. It was a victory, but a fragile one, and an expensive one. Those residents now pay some of the highest water rates in the state for the privilege of turning on their taps. Their story is a warning. When the public system fails, survival comes at a premium. This seems like a good time to remind you, and I know this is the second time I'm asking, but subscribing is genuinely the most powerful way you can support this channel. A lot of incredible people watch these videos but forget to click. Don't be one of them. Take a second. It's free, and it makes a world of difference. Your click tells the algorithm that in-depth stories still matter. So where does this leave Phoenix? The city is trapped in a perfect storm. Its first pillar of water, the Colorado River, is permanently diminished. The federal cuts are real, and they are not going away. In fact, they could get worse. At Lake Mead, the water level in June 2026 hovered around 1,044 feet. The critical danger zone for the Hoover Dam is 1,035 feet. If the lake drops just another 9 feet, the dam loses over 70% of its power generating capacity. Below that level, the intense pressure changes can create air bubbles that literally rip the dam's turbines apart. The water crisis becomes a massive power grid crisis, right as summer heat waves demand more and more air conditioning. The city's second pillar, groundwater, has been exposed as a fraud. The 4.86 million acre-foot deficit is a ticking time bomb under every new construction project. And yet, thanks to a court order, the building is set to continue. Developers are now legally empowered to build new communities on the city's fringe, chase short-term profits, and leave future generations to deal with the inevitable, catastrophic bill when the wells finally sputter and die. All while the ground itself sinks beneath them. And the final escape hatch, the billion-dollar plan to desalinate the ocean, has been gutted by the state's own short-sighted politicians. It is a crisis on every level, physical, legal, and political, and it's all coming to a head right now. There is one more deadline that should terrify everyone in the American West. December 31st, 2026, on that day. The two key agreements that govern the Colorado River, the 2007 Interim Guidelines, and the 2019 Drought Contingency Plan, both expire. 7 states, including Arizona, California, and Nevada, must agree on a new set of rules for sharing a river that is a shadow of its former self. If they fail to reach a consensus, the management of the West's most important water source will be thrown into complete and utter chaos. It's a political time bomb set to go off in a matter of months. Phoenix is not evacuating today. The headline is a warning, not a current event, but for the first time in the city's history. The path from a thriving metropolis to an empty ghost town is no longer theoretical. The evidence is there. The data is clear. The pillars are failing. A suburb has already run dry. A judge has sanctioned a policy of collective delusion, and the people in charge have raided their own emergency fund. Okay, last time, I promise. But I'm going to lean on a little humor here. Did you subscribe? Because if you didn't, the algorithm might think you don't like me. And I really want the algorithm to like me. So please, click the button. It's the ultimate vote of confidence. The city of Phoenix is conducting a terrifying real-world experiment. What happens when you tell 5 million people that the laws of physics are optional? What happens when you build a civilization on a resource you know is disappearing and then legally obligate yourselves to ignore the evidence? Las Vegas drilled a tunnel to buy itself time. Phoenix is drilling new wells into an aquifer it knows is already empty. It is not a strategy for survival. It is a recipe for building the largest, most modern, and most expensive ghost town in human history. The water still flows from the taps, for now, but the desert is patient, and the desert always wins. The real question is no longer if the water will run out. It's who will be the last